ॐ विश्वन्दर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतम् पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयम् तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वार्तिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठम् अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यैः सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे। नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रिय ब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम्। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे भुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयः प्रदीपः। प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्स सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरणनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः। पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितं। लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरहः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमल प्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे Paramanandamadhavam Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutah Stunvanti Divyaistavaihi Vedaihi Sangapadakramopanishadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tatkatena Manasa Pashyanti Yan Yoginah Yasyantam na vidussura suraganaha Devaya tasmai namaha Devaya tasmai namaha. I welcome you all to the 26th class of our Bhagavad Gita study. We will read verse number 54 of the second chapter. Sthitaprajñasya ka bhasha
स्थितप्रज्ञस्य का भाषा
samadhisthasya keshava
समाधिस्तस्य केशव
स्थितधीः किं प्रभाषेत
स्थितधीः किं प्रभाषेत
किमासीत व्रजेत किम्.
किमासीत व्रजेत किम्.
Well, we saw in the last class, Bhagavan has concluded the teaching of the Gita Saraha, which is the essence of the entire Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter. And Bhagavan's teaching started from verse number 11. And the Gita Saraha portion concluded in verse number 53, the one before this verse. And in this portion, Bhagavan taught Arjuna Atma Jnanam, self-knowledge, with which one attains moksha. How? Purely by knowledge, by understanding that I am really of the nature of Atma, that is, one with Brahman, which is the adhishthanam of the entire Jagat. And as Brahman, I belong to a higher order of reality. And therefore, I am utterly unaffected by anything that happens either in the body-mind complex or in the world, both of which belong to a lower order of reality. Exactly like the waker who belongs to a higher order of reality is utterly unaffected by anything that happens in the dream which belongs to a lower order of reality. So through Atma Jnanam, through this knowledge, I recognize that my nature is moksha. Moksha is not something that I need to attain. The fact that I thought that I was bound and I am suffering, etc., all of that is purely because of ignorance of not recognizing what my real nature is. Just like the waker who enters the dream suffers in the dream after having forgotten his waker status. But upon awakening, he understands that I am the waker who is free of the dream. So the situation is very similar here as well. So this is the Atma Jnanam portion. But then in order to attain this Atma Jnanam, I need a certain purity of mind. I need a certain preparation of mind. So Atma Jnanam is attained through Jnana Yoga. But in order to prepare myself for Jnana Yoga, or in other words, for me to have this Jnana Yogyata, a preparation of mind, I need to go through the discipline of Karma Yoga. And that is what Bhagavan taught in the section that followed the teaching of the Atma Jnana. And Karma Yoga has proper actions coupled with proper attitude. And through this, I gain the preparation of mind. So Bhagavan summarized both of the Jnana Yoga as well as the Karma Yoga. In fact, Karma Yoga was summarized, the phalam of Karma Yoga was summarized in verse number 52. And the phalam of Jnana Yoga was summarized in verse number 53. In verse number 52, Bhagavan said, Yada te moha kalilam buddhihi vyatitarishyati tada gantasi nirvedam shrotavyasya shrutasya cha. So Bhagavan said, moha kalilam. He said, moha kalilam refers to the impurity of avivekaha, not recognizing the difference between what is permanent, what is impermanent. What is nityaha and what is anityaha, not recognizing, not discriminating between this, the human being spends his whole life in pursuit of the anitya vastu, the pursuit of arthaha, kamaha, and dharmaha, all of which come under the anitya vastu only. Bhagavan says, when your mind crosses over this impurity of avivekaha, the impurity of non-discrimination means when your mind gains the vivekaha. Which vivekaha? Nitya nitya vastu vivekaha. What happens when one gains nitya nitya vastu vivekaha? One recognizes the defects of all these material pursuits, of the pursuits of the anitya vastu. That there is dukkha mishritatvam, it's mixed with sorrow. Atriptikaratvam, it leaves me unfulfilled. And bandhakatvam, it makes me more and more dependent upon the world, which is inherently unpredictable, uncontrollable, and unsustainable. And therefore, if I want nitya sukham, I cannot get it from the anitya vastu, because the anitya vastu has a date of birth and a date of expiry. And therefore, I need to reorient my pursuit towards the Nitya Vastu. This is the Nitya Vastu Vivekaha. I need to reorient my pursuit towards the discovery of Brahman, towards moksha. And then Bhagavan says, Tada Gantasi Nirvedam, meaning once one gets this Nitya Vastu Vivekaha, and Vairagyam follows that. In the sense, when I recognize that whatever I have been pursuing is anityaha, then I stop clinging to, I stop depending on, I stop the longing for such pursuits. Therefore, tada gantasi nirvedam, one gains this vairagyam. So the vivekaha and vairagyam, these qualifications are the phalam of karma yoga, by leading a life of karma yoga. And then the karma kanda becomes irrelevant for such a person, because the karma kanda has accomplished its purpose by giving these qualifications. That is the real purpose of the karma kanda, to prepare one for jnana yoga by giving the preparation of mind through a life of karma yoga. So once one has gained these qualifications, then the jnana kanda and the jnana yoga become relevant. They are in fact the only relevant pursuits for such a person. And then Bhagavan describes the phalam of Jnana Yoga in verse number 53 that we saw. Where Bhagavan says, Shruti Vipratipannate Yada Sthasyati Nischala Samadhavachala Buddhihi Tada Yogam Avapsyasi. So when this mind is no longer confused about the purpose of the Veda, when it's not Shruti Vipratipanna, meaning that when it is not totally engaged in the pursuits of these rajasa karmas that are described in the karma kanda portion of the Veda for the sake of material accomplishments. Such a buddhi is shruti vipratipanna. So when the buddhi ceases to be like this, and it abides in the Atma, which is and it is free of doubt, achala, and free of these habitual habitual identification with the body, mind, and habitual dependence upon the world. Nischala. So when it is, when it abides in the Atma. And how does it come to abide in the Atma? Through the pursuit of Jnana Yoga, through the pursuit of Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasa. Through Shravanam, one removes one's self-ignorance. I have to first know that there is something called Atma and that I am of the nature of Atma. How do I know all this? Through Shravanam. And that Atma is Brahman, again through Shravanam only. There is no other means to know this. So this is how I remove the self-ignorance. Then through Mananam, I remove all doubts. And then through Nididhyasanam, I remove all habitual identification and habitual dependence upon the world, emotional dependence upon the world. Such a mind, Bhagavan says, Tada Yogam Avapsyasi, meaning it attains this wisdom and it attains moksha. Then Bhagavan, as we said, concluded the portion, the Gita Saraha portion. But as we have said, that Vedanta is not a matter of belief. It is not a matter of blindly saying that, oh Guru, I believe you. That is not what Vedanta is about. Vedanta is about understanding. I have to be convinced myself that this is the truth, nothing but the truth. And therefore, one has to clarify one's own doubts. Doubts and understanding, correct understanding cannot coexist. And therefore, Arjuna had a question. And Arjuna asked this question in verse number 54 that we just read, where Arjuna asks, Sthitaprajñasya ka bhasha samadhisthasya keshava sthitadhihi kim prabhasheta kim asita vrajeta kim. So Arjuna has listened to Krishna. And then he sees that whatever Krishna talked about is quite a bit of commitment. It is, in fact, a lot of commitment. It is a reorientation of the pursuit of my life. Therefore, I have to take up karma yoga. I have to do proper action. I have to eliminate the tamasa karmas. I have to reduce the rajasa karmas. I have to increase the sattvika karmas. I have to adopt an attitude of Ishwararpana buddhi and samatvam prasada buddhi. And then I gain the qualifications vivekaha and vairagyam. And then I come to jnana yoga. And in jnana yoga, I have to go to a guru. There is no jnana yoga without a guru. I have to go to a guru, do shravanam, mananam, nididhyasam. And finally, I come to this Atma Jnanam and Moksha. This requires a very committed pursuit. And therefore, Arjuna wants to understand better what the end product of this is. You are talking about this Jnani, you are talking about this Jnana person who abides in this Jnana, person who abides in his real nature. How does this person move about? How does this person interact in the world? How does this person respond to situations in life? What are the characteristics of such a person? Arjuna wants to understand this so that he can make a call about whether this entire sadhana of karma yoga and jnana yoga and the final culmination of all of this, whether it is really worth all of the time and effort that I'm going to put in. And therefore, here Arjuna uses the word Sthitaprajña, Sthitaprajña, Sthitaprajña yasya saha, meaning one who has internalized, assimilated this knowledge, whose knowledge is very, very firm and steady. So such a person, how is he described by the Shastras? How is he described by the wise ones? Sthitaprajñasya ka bhasha. And he uses the word samadhisthasya, which is another synonym for sthitaprajñasya only, to indicate the one who has internalized and assimilated this wisdom. And Arjuna asks, how does such a person walk? Sthitadhihi kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. Vrajeta kim means how does he walk? How does he talk? Kim prabhasheta kimasita. How does he sit? So Arjuna is in some way struggling to frame his question. He perhaps doesn't expect a literal answer to all of this, but what he really wants to know is what are the characteristics of such a person. So Krishna also understands the spirit behind Arjuna's question and responds, as we will see from the next verse, about the characteristics of such a person. And Bhagavan not only responds with the characteristics of such a person, but also responds with the sadhanas that go into making of the Sthitaprajña. So in fact, the characteristics of such a person, they themselves become the sadhanas for the seeker of knowledge, for the seeker of moksha. So they are virtues or characteristics that manifest spontaneously in adhyana nishtaha or sthitaprajñaha. But then the same characteristics or virtues, they become values to be cultivated, to be emulated by the seeker of moksha. Like we took an example. We took two examples in the last class of a person who wants to get into a running train. So when a person wants to get into a running train, which has just started from the station, then initially he has to put in some effort to run at the same speed of the train. And then he makes a horizontal transition through the door into the train. And once he gets into the train, he can stop. He continues to run at the same speed, spontaneously, without effort. So is the situation here that the mumukshu tries to cultivate the values, and not just the values mentioned in this section, but Bhagavan mentions a lot of the values throughout the Bhagavad Gita. Like in chapter 13 also, there is quite a detailed discussion on values. And in various other chapters also. And therefore, the idea of this is not just to describe what the Jnani is, but in order to understand the characteristics of the Jnani and try to emulate them in my own life. And I don't have the knowledge which makes them manifest spontaneously, but still I try to emulate them. Why? Is it like running at the speed of the train without being in the train? Because then this kind of an emulation, it allows me to transition into the jnanam more easily. The other example we took was of an unhealthy limb. So the limb is unhealthy, and if you ask this person to move, his limb is like shivering. But when the physiotherapist comes in, what does he do? He makes him do this movement of his limb. With a lot of effort, he does that. But then gradually, as he repeats that, and as he continues to repeat that 10 times in the morning, 10 times in the afternoon, 10 times in the evening, then gradually his limb gains the strength. And as the limb gains the strength, the movement becomes very spontaneous. So is the situation here as well. So this is the first benefit of studying the section which talks about the characteristics of the Jnani. And of course, like we said, Bhagavan also mentions the sadhanas explicitly as well, that go into the making of such a Jnana-nishtha. Then the second benefit is that we can use that as a self-check, that these are the characteristics of a Jnani. Now, I have been engaged in the study. I have been engaging in the study for so much time, and what progress have I made? And how do I stand in relation to what Bhagavan is talking about? And like we said, this should be used to judge ourselves and not anybody else. So with this, we will go to the reply that Bhagavan gives from the 55th verse. Shri Bhagavanuvacha
श्रीभगवानुवाच
Prajahati yada kaman
प्रजहाति यदा कामान्
Sarvan Parthamanogataan
सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान्
Atmanyevatmana Tushtaha
आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टः
Sthitaprajñastadochyate.
स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते.
So we do the Padacheda here. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmani Eva Atmani Eva Atmana Tushtaha Sthitaprajñah Tada Uchyate Tada Uchyate. So Bhagavan says, Hey Partha, so there's Partha in the second quarter. Bhagavan says, Hey Partha, means, O Arjuna, Yada Prajahati is there in the first quarter. Yada Prajahati means when he gives up. And when he gives up means when he gives up what? Sarvan Kaman. Sarvan Kaman literally means all desires. All desires. Here, we have to understand that Bhagavan doesn't mean all desires, but all binding desires. We have to add one adjective there, all binding desires. So we will discuss what that means. Sarvan Kaman means all binding desires. Sarvan Bandhaka Kaman, we can say. Bandhaka Kaman. Manogatan. Manogatan means that appear in the mind. Because all desires appear in the mind only. There is nowhere else that desires appear. And being what one gives up. So Bhagavan is saying, Yada manogatan sarvan kaman prajahati means when one gives up all these binding desires that appear in the mind. And being what does one give them up? One says, Tushtaha in the third quarter. Tushtaha. Tushtaha means totally satisfied, totally content. Tushtaha. Totally satisfied, content and happy. And content and happy, satisfied with what? Atmana. We have in the third quarter, Atmani eva Atmana tushtaha. Atmana tushtaha means totally satisfied, content with oneself. Atmana tushtaha. And where content and happy, where Atmani eva means in oneself. So Atmani eva Atmana tushtaha means he is totally content in himself, with himself. Tada uchyate. Tada uchyate. Tadochyate is there in the last quarter. That is tada uchyate means then it is said. Then he is said. Then he is said to be what? Sthitaprajñah tada uchyate. Meaning he is said to be this Sthitaprajñah, or a person who has internalized and assimilated this knowledge. And therefore, like we said, these verses are giving the characteristics of the Jnana-nishtha, of the Sthitaprajñah. And the first characteristic, here Bhagavan is giving two characteristics in the shloka. First characteristic is Atmani eva Atmana tushtaha. Means Pūrṇatvam. This is the Pūrṇatvam that we have been talking about. Pūrṇatvam, that he is happy and content with himself. He sees himself as full, complete, limitless. Purna. Just like a sugar crystal. If we take a sugar crystal, then the sugar crystal has no need to seek sweetness from outside. Why? Because it is of the nature of sweetness. Similarly, this Sthitaprajñah, knowing that I am full, complete, limitless, Purnaha, has no need to seek completeness from outside. Because I am full, complete by myself. And I don't have to seek anything from outside. So in some ways, if we say that we have a UPS at home or solar power at home, let us say. So if you have solar power at home or some uninterrupted power supply at home, then if the corporation power is there, that is well and good. So you can use the corporation power also, it is there, nothing wrong in using that. But if the corporation power is not there, then he doesn't miss it. So similarly, the Jnani, Jnananishtaha, the Sthitaprajña has got his own UPS of fullness, completeness, Pūrṇatvam. And therefore, he doesn't have to beg for Pūrṇatvam from this world. So this self-sufficiency or contentment is the first indication of a Jnananishtaha. He doesn't need any crutches. He doesn't need any crutches on which he depends on which he leans on for his fullness and completeness. Unlike an Ajnani who depends emotionally upon various things in the world, who has these emotional crutches. So unlike the Jnani has got no emotional crutches. Then the second Lakshana that Bhagavan gives here is Manogatan Sarvan Kaman Prajahati. Means he gives up all binding desires. So this is nothing but a consequence of the Pūrṇatvam. Consequence of the Pūrṇatvam is that the Jnananishtaha, the Sthitaprajña, has got freedom from all binding desires. So why do we add the adjective binding here? Why do we say Bhagavan here really means Sarvan Bandhaka Kaman? Why do we add that adjective? Sarvan Bandhakan Kaman or Sarvan Bandhaka Kaman? Why do we say that? So we say that desires can be classified into two. Just like there is two kinds of cholesterol. One is good cholesterol and the other is bad cholesterol. So the bad cholesterol is the one that is harmful for us. In fact, if the good cholesterol is less in the test, then a doctor says you have to improve the good cholesterol. So similarly, the desires can be classified into two: binding desires and non-binding desires. Binding desires are those desires that are born out of a sense of incompleteness, with the idea that acquiring something else is going to make me complete. And this kind of a desire causes preoccupation of the mind. It causes restlessness of the mind. It causes worry. It causes anxiety until it is fulfilled. Mind cannot rest because I see myself as incomplete. And an inadequate, incomplete self is never acceptable to me. And when such a desire is not fulfilled, then it results in helplessness, anger, frustration, depression, etc. So such a desire is a bandhaka kamaha. Such a desire is a binding desire. On the other hand, there are non-binding desires where I am okay whether the desire is fulfilled or not. It is more like a preference. If it is accomplished, fine. If it is not accomplished, also I am fine. There is no critical dependence upon its fulfillment. The fulfillment or non-fulfillment, really speaking, makes no difference to me at all. So such desires are not born out of the sense of apurnatva. So even we understand in our own lives that somebody says whether you want whether in tea you want one teaspoon of sugar or 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. You don't care. You put what you want. Not a big deal. So such preferences, such desires are called, really speaking, preferences. Do you want idli or do you want dosa? Yeah, whatever you have, give me, I'm fine. So I don't have any demand with regards to my preferences. Whether it is fulfilled or not, fine. So here, Bhagavan says Sarvan Kaman, even though Bhagavan says all desires, Bhagavan cannot mean all desires. Bhagavan cannot include the non-binding desires. Why? Because if we take Bhagavan himself, Bhagavan had a desire to teach Arjuna. And Bhagavad Pada had a desire to write the bhashyas, and that is why he wrote all these bhashyas. Or Vedavyasa had a desire to write Mahabharata, and that is why we are able to study the Bhagavad Gita. So such desires did not arise because of a sense of incompleteness. And therefore, these are called non-binding desires. And a jnani can have any number of such non-binding desires. Non-binding desires need not be given up. And therefore, we say Bhagavan cannot mean all desires, because if Bhagavan meant all desires, then it would mean that all of these people, including Bhagavan, would need to be a non-Sthitaprajña, which doesn't make sense. And therefore, we say Sarvan Bandhaka Kaman Prajahati, or Sarvan binding desires he gives up. So, a jnani can have any number of non-binding desires. In fact, that is the main reason why a jnani or a jnananishtha or a sthitaprajña acts in the world. This is his actions in the world are somewhat like, and we have looked at this example before, of a cricket team. Let's take a cricket team which is engaged in a 5-match series. Now, after having won the first 3 matches, with what attitude will they play the remaining 2 matches? So they have already won the series. But then they don't say, I will not play the remaining matches. They still play the remaining matches. But then the outcome of it doesn't matter. Whether they win or lose doesn't matter. They have already won the series. So similarly, the Jnana-nishtha already won the series of life with this knowledge and with the internalization and abidance of the knowledge. He knows that I have attained what needs to be attained in this life, and there is, really speaking, nothing more left to attain. But then he acts in the world. He acts in the world, and whatever he acts, the outcomes don't matter at all. Why? Because he has already discovered that fullness and completeness. So such desires are non-binding desires, and the outcome of those is not at all that important, but still the jnani acts in the world. So now Bhagavan says, Sarvan Kaman Prajahati, all these binding desires are dropped. They are all cleaned up. How? So we say it is not by suppression. Because these desires, if the desire is there, then there are 2 ways of dealing with the desire. One is to try to suppress that desire. But we say that suppression is dangerous. Suppression never works. It's a bit like a pressure cooker. The pressure cooker has to let out its steam. So if we try to somehow force that pressure cooker, if we block the opening through which it lets out the steam, then that's a very dangerous situation. The pressure cooker can burst. So psychologically, it will take one into a very bad state if one tries to suppress binding desires. So what does a Jnana-nishtha do? How does he drop these binding desires? We say he doesn't even have to give up or drop them. They just drop off. They drop off. Because the binding desires originate from a sense of incompleteness, from a sense of Pūrṇatvam. That is what is the cause of the binding desire. If you look at what causes that binding desire, then it is a sense of Pūrṇatvam. It is a sense of incompleteness. But the Jnani, having known that I am already Brahman, that is full, limitless, complete, Purna, such a binding desire cannot coexist with the knowledge. It is impossible. Because the sense of Apurnatvam, the sense of inadequacy, that sense of wantingness is not there at all. And therefore, no binding desires. There are no binding desires that arise in the mind of a Jnani. Any desire that arises in the mind of a Jnani is a non-binding desire by definition. Because it arises out of his Purnatvam, not out of the sense of Apurnatvam. And therefore, it becomes more like a preference, whether it is satisfied, fine, not satisfied, fine. There is no critical dependence upon its satisfaction. And this is a bit like a person who, let us say, has some leg injury or something like that. Or a person who was born with some problem in the legs, and because of which he has been using crutches. But now, let us say that this person discovers the strength in his own legs. Then he doesn't need the crutches. In fact, you can say the crutches drop off. In fact, for a while, he may habitually still be using the crutches. But then he gradually finds that I don't really need these crutches because I have discovered the strength in my own legs. And therefore, gradually he may sometimes even forget where the crutches are and he finds himself walking around and then he realizes I don't even need the crutches. So the situation is something similar like that. Similar in this case also. All these desires that one thinks that they are very, very important to be fulfilled. The Jnani discovers the Pūrṇatvam, the fullness, and therefore they just drop off. Tada Sthitaprajña uchyate. So such a person is a person who has internalized and assimilated the knowledge. So Bhagavan gave two lakshanams here, two characteristics here of the Sthitaprajña. First is Atmani eva atmana tushtaha, or this Pūrṇatvam, this fullness, completeness. And then the second is, so there is no sense of inadequacy, no Apurnatvam. And the second is Sarvan Manogatan Kaman Prajahati, which is a consequence of this Pūrṇatvam, that the binding desires fall off. So Bhagavan gave two characteristics here. But if we really look into what is behind these characteristics, it is really this assimilated knowledge that I am Brahman. This is, if you were to really ask for one characteristic, it would be that he has assimilated the knowledge that I am Brahman. And the others are all really effects of this primary characteristic. So like we said, Bhagavan talked about the characteristics, two characteristics of a Jnani here. And out of this, we can also derive some sadhanas that we can emulate. And that is why we say, just because in case of the Jnani, the binding desires drop off spontaneously because of his knowledge of his own Pūrṇatvam. But then at the Karma Yoga level, one does not have the knowledge, then one makes an effort to make one's binding desires like non-binding. So one tries to convert one's own ragas and dveshas into preferences. This is what happens when one adopts the attitude of prasada buddhihi and samatvam. That if whatever action I did based on my desire, whether the outcome is more than expected, equal to what I expected, less than expected, or opposite of what I expected, I regulate my response in such a way that I have equanimity of mind. So in this way, I am with effort trying to convert my binding desire into a non-binding desire. I'm trying to convert my ragas, dveshas into preferences, and there is effort involved. But in case of a jnani, it happens spontaneously. But then this effort itself is like trying to run at the speed of the train, even though I am not the train. So now in the next verses, Bhagavan is providing an elaboration or a commentary, a further elaboration of the main content in this verse. So we will read verse number 56. Dukkheshvanudvignamanaha
दुःखेष्वनुद्विग्नमनाः
Sukheshu vigataspruhaha
सुखेषु विगतस्पृहः
Vitaragabhayakrodhaha
वीतरागभयक्रोधः
Sthitadhir muniruchyate.
स्थितधीर्मुनिरुच्यते.
So dukkheshu, so we do the padachhedaha. Dukkheshu, dukkheshu anudvignamanaha. Dukkheshu anudvignamanaha. Sukheshu vigataspruhaha. Vitaraga bhayakrodhaha. Sthitadhihi munihi uchyate. Sthitadhihi munihi uchyate. So Bhagavan says, Uchyate. Uchyate meaning he is said to be. And he is said to be what? Munihi. Munihi means a sage, a wise person, a sage. And what kind of wise person or what kind of sage is he said to be? Sthitadhihi. Sthitadhihi means one whose knowledge is steady. It's really a synonym of Sthitaprajña. So Bhagavan is giving more characteristics of the Sthitaprajña. So one who has internalized, assimilated this knowledge, one whose knowledge is steady, is Sthitadhihi. So then who is said to be this Munihi, Sthitadhihi Munihi? Who is said to be this wise person, a sage of steady knowledge? Bhagavan gives 5 more characteristics here, 5 more lakshanams. Bhagavan says, Anudvignamanaha. Anudvignamanaha means he is unaffected. Unaffected in what? Dukkheshu satsu. So even when there are unfavorable situations, he is unaffected. And then Vigataspruhaha in the second quarter. Vigataspruhaha means he has no craving, no longing, no addiction. Vigataspruhaha. In what? In what circumstances? Sukheshu satsu. Sukheshu, meaning when there are favorable or pleasurable situations, also he doesn't have any longing, craving, or addiction for that situation to continue, or for him to repeat that situation, keep coming back to that situation in the future. And Vitaragha Bhayakrodhaha means he is free from ragaha, attachment, bhayaha, fear, and free from krodhaha, anger. So here Bhagavan is indirectly telling us also that just becoming a jnani or a jnananishtaha, sthitaprajñaha doesn't mean that situations outside will become different. So just like an ajnani, a jnani also has to go through favorable and unfavorable situations, because the prarabdha karma is not yet exhausted. And as long as the prarabdha is not yet exhausted, the job of prarabdha is to bring sukha and dukkha, to bring favorable and unfavorable situations into the jnani's life. Just like prarabdha brings favorable and unfavorable situations into an ajnani's life. So until the fall of the body, this will happen. So, so the jnani, just because he has become a jnani, he has gained this jnanam, doesn't mean that the people around him change. He has to still deal with the same family, the same boss. If he's a grihastha jnani, he has to deal with the same family, the same boss, the same father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, whoever is there. They are not going to change just because the jnani gained some jnana. In fact, they may not even know that this jnani has undergone this internal transformation. So they are going to behave exactly like they used to. So if we take a jnani who is a sannyasi, then in case of the sannyasi jnani, he has to still deal with whoever the same visitors are, or different types of visitors will come to see him, or he may deal with the same shishyas. He has to deal with the same shishya. He may be running some ashrama, and then there may be some staff in the ashrama. He has to deal with the same people. He may even have to deal with the government. So there may be people who may praise such a person. Jnani, maybe a grihastha, maybe a sannyasi, whoever. And sometimes he has to face censure from the same people or different people. So the situations may be favorable and unfavorable. The world will not change just because this person attained jnana. But the difference is that the jnani's mind, as compared to an ajnani's mind, has got this strength in it. So imagine a vehicle without shock absorbers at all. And now consider a vehicle that has got very good shock absorbers. So they both go on the same road, the same potholes. But then the vehicle without shock absorbers, you'll just feel it a lot and you'll end up with a lot of pain. But the vehicle that has got these shock absorbers, you don't even realize much. You just continue with your conversation as if nothing happened. You don't even realize that much that you have gone over a very bad pothole. So the situation is similar in case of a jnani. And we say that this transition is not a sudden process for the jnani. Just that he gained jnanam, then suddenly he gains this emotional strength. So the conversion of the knowledge has to be converted into emotional strength. And in fact, this process starts even with karma yoga, even without the knowledge. When one adopts the attitude of samatvam and prasada buddhi, etc., one is trying to cultivate the equanimity of mind with some effort. So that process starts even with karma yoga. And it continues after jnanam also. And, and therefore we say that it is not a sudden transformation. But what one sees in one's own life is what we call FIR reduction. So FIR reduction means the frequency of negative reactions come down. So we take that F to mean frequency. So the frequency of negative reactions come down. So earlier, when one is making when one is an ajnani, let us say, who's going about one's life, and morning it may start with he gets up and then he starts with brushing his teeth and he's not able to find the toothpaste. And then he starts to scream at people saying that where is the toothpaste? I kept it here, it is not here. And then he goes and he finds that the coffee decoction is not there. And then he screams at somebody else. And then he goes out and then he goes to work and then there is a traffic jam. And then he may roll down his window and scream at somebody else. So there is the frequency of negative reactions that's quite high. But then the moment one becomes a karma yogi or a jnani, in either case, so so when one consciously tries to create this equanimity of mind in karma yoga, or once one tries to abide in this jnanam that I am already full, complete, limitless Brahman in case of a jnani, when one brings in this kind of an attitude and one abides in the knowledge, at that point one consciously takes an effort to respond in keeping with one's attitude in karma yoga or one's knowledge in jnana yoga. And therefore, the frequency of these reactions come down. And then the intensity of these reactions also come down, because earlier we can define the intensity at three levels. The least intense is when the reaction is contained within one's own mind. But then if that reaction is stronger, then it may spill to one's speech, where one may say some hurting words or shout at somebody. And then if it is still more intense, it may even spill to the level of one's own body, where one feels some kind of shivering. Even when one is speaking, there is some shivering in the hand, or there's trembling in one's lips tremble as one is speaking. Maybe the eyes become red. One's heart rate goes up, one's BP goes up. So it reflects even at the level of the body. This is the intensity of the negative reaction. And again, with FIR reduction, and I'll repeat that this FIR reduction happens for a karma yogi also, and for a jnani subsequent to the jnanam, as the jnanam is internalized. So the intensity of the reaction also comes down. What earlier used to spill over to the body level now is contained to the speech. What earlier used to spill over to the speech level is now contained to the mind. But as the knowledge is internalized more and more, then even the disturbance in the mind, if at all it happens, it comes down. And then there is the recovery period after a negative reaction. That also comes down. Earlier, one would have found that perhaps if there was a negative reaction, then one lost sleep at night. And sometimes that carries over to the next day and the next day and so on. Sometimes for a week, one is disturbed. But then gradually, the time of recovery time also comes down. And for one who has totally internalized this knowledge, has assimilated this knowledge very well, the transition is almost immediate. That one gets some bad or news, someone gets some bad news or some news that would otherwise have disturbed the person or an ajnani for a very long period of time. So both start off with what? The ajnani also starts off with what? And the jnani also starts off with what? Because the mind is anatma. When there is a shock, there is a shock. So both may say what? But then for the ajnani, that disturbance continues for a very long duration, whereas for a jnani who has assimilated this knowledge, both of them come to a so what after some period of time. Both of them may say, so what? I can continue. I have to continue with my life and not be taken over, not be consumed by this. Both of them come to that state. But then for the ajnani to come to that point takes a much longer, whereas for the jnani, the gap between between the what and the so what is very small and instantaneous for the one who has assimilated this knowledge well. So this is the FIR reduction. And Bhagavan says in subsequently in the Gita also that Guruna api dukkhena na vichalyate. Guruna api dukkhena na vichalyate. Meaning even the greatest. Guruna means the most severe or the greatest or the heaviest. Dukkhena, unfavorable situation, he is not disturbed by that. So, dukkheshu anudvikna manaha, Bhagavan is saying here. So, in the presence of unfavorable situations, and unfavorable situations can come from three sources. There is adhyatmika, adhibhautika, and adhidaivika. It can come from within one's own body and mind, like one may have a certain disease or certain fever or whatever. Or from beings around me, adhibhautika, or adhidaivika, from the natural forces. And therefore, unfavorable situations can come from any of these sources. So prarabdha karma, as we have said, the job of the prarabdha is to bring both favorable and unfavorable situations based on one's past punya papa. So prarabdha continues until the fall of the body, even for ajnani. So now in case of an ajnani, when an unfavorable situation comes, he says, I am sad, I am suffering, I am in pain. So he doesn't understand who this I really is, and therefore he transfers all of this onto himself. I am sad, I am suffering. And then his mind goes on a trip. Then he worries about it, he indulges in self-pity, and then he complains about it, that why is this happening only to me and not to somebody else? So this type of a mind is udvikna manaha, udvikna manaha. Whereas a jnananishtaha, who has got the shock absorber of jnanam, and because of his long practice in karma yoga and his practice in terms of internalization and assimilation of this jnanam, he has got this FIR reduction. And because of this FIR reduction, many of these disturbances don't create even a ripple in the mind. They are like, because the jnanam shock absorber is there. And therefore, he tides over these disturbances without there being any ripples in the mind. And therefore, the mind remains equanimous. For a karma yogi, it is equanimous because of his effort at regulating his response. For a jnana yogi, it is equanimous because of the assimilation of the knowledge. And therefore, he never says, I am suffering, I am sad, I am disturbed. He never says this. Because he knows, I am full, complete, limitless, I am Brahman. And as Brahman, I cannot have any sadness, any suffering, any disturbance. And therefore, his mind is anudvikna manaha, jnani's mind. And sukheshu vigata spruha, when there is a pleasurable or favorable situation, then what does an ajnani, what is the ajnani's response to it? The ajnani's response is that this happiness has come from such and such a person, such and such an object, such and such a situation. And then he wants to develop, he wants more of the same person, the same object, the same situation. He develops a craving for it. He develops a longing for it. He develops a dependence upon it. And Bhagavad Pada gives this example of fire. Like in fire, if you put ghee, then as you put more and more ghee, the fire becomes bigger and bigger, as if it wants more and more of it. The bigger the fire, the more it wants to consume. With a small fire, it is happy getting less, but then the more you feed it, it becomes bigger, the more it wants. This is the mind of an ajnani. Whereas in case of a jnani, if there is prarabdha brings favorable situations, and that may give rise to pleasure and happiness in the mind of a jnani also, much like an ajnani's mind. That has come not because the jnani has sought after it, but it has come because of prarabdha. But then the jnani does not develop a craving for it. Why? Because the jnani has the jnanam that no object, no person, and no situation in the world inherently has any happiness for it to give me. In fact, this happiness that I'm experiencing in the mind is a reflection of my own nature, of my own fullness, completeness. The mind also doesn't have any inherent happiness. If the happiness is appearing in the mind, it is my own reflection that is appearing in my own mind. Just like I see my face in the mirror. When I see my face in the mirror doesn't have the face. The face did not come from anywhere else. The face in the mirror has come from me, the original face. Similarly, this happiness that I experience in the mind has not come from the object outside. It is my own reflection because I am of the nature of happiness. And therefore, in the jnani, there is no longing, there is no craving for the situation to continue. Prarabdha has brought the happiness. Let it'll be there for some time, and when the prarabdha punya will exhaust itself, this happiness will also come to an end. The reflected happiness will come to an end, but I have nothing to lose because this was just my own reflection. Just like when I see my own reflection in the mirror go away because the mirror breaks or the mirror has been removed, that doesn't mean my original face has gone away. So the jnani knows that if this favorable situation is there, fine, I can enjoy it. But if the favorable situation stops because the prarabdha ends, then I have nothing to lose because I am of the nature of happiness. I am still full and complete, whether this is there or whether it is not there. And therefore, the jnani does not develop any craving or longing for it. Sukheshu vigatas pruhaha. And vitaraga bhayakrodha. So raga bhaya krodha. So here Bhagavan is describing a different chain of samsara symptoms. Earlier we had seen ragaha, shokaha and mohaha. That is emotional dependence upon the world creates sorrow, shokaha and mohaha, delusion. But here Bhagavan is talking about ragaha, bhaya krodha. A different chain of samsara symptoms. The emotional dependence upon the world causes ragaha, causes bhayaha, and also causes krodhaha, anger, fear and anger. So the jnani is free of this ragaha. In case of the ajnani, if he has ragaha, means he is clinging to, longing for, depending upon some person, object, or situation in the world. That is what we call ragaha. And then, and this is there because he sees himself as wanting and inadequate, apurnaha. I am deficient, I am apurnaha. And therefore, he has to compulsively depend upon something or the other in the world. Therefore, from this apurnatvam, ragaha comes in. And his ragaha is a binding ragaha. It is a bandhaka ragaha. Bandhaka ragaha, binding ragaha. It is an emotional crutch. And if that person, object, or situation departs, something changes, then his emotional crutch breaks. He has an emotional fall. And that is what causes all of this disturbance in the mind. Helplessness, anger, frustration, depression, all of these follow. Emotional turmoil. Whereas a jnani, he knows I am purna, I am full, I am complete. And therefore, the jnani cannot have any emotional crutch. The jnani cannot critically depend upon any person, object, or situation in the world. In fact, the jnani has no dependence upon the entire world also. Let the entire world goes away, I am still Purnaha. Why? Because that was what it was before Srishti. Brahman alone was there. And Brahman was Purnaha. And this world appears in Brahman, but Brahman remains Purnaha. And if the entire world goes away, also Brahman remains Purnaha. And I am that Brahman in whom this world has arisen, by whom this world is sustained, and into which the world will resolve. I am Purnaha, whether this world is there or not. Just like gold is complete, full and complete, whether the ornaments are there or not, there is no change that happens in gold. Whether the ornaments come and go. And therefore, such a jnani who is unconditionally full and complete, cannot have any binding ragas at all, cannot have any emotional crutches at all. And therefore, there cannot be any emotional turmoil in this jnani's mind. So, Vita ragaha and bhayaha, there is no fear also. Because if we look at what is the cause of fear, the cause of fear is some kind of dependence. When I have this emotional crutch, I have a fear that whatever I am depending upon can go away, that my emotional crutch can break, and that will cause emotional turmoil. There is this fear. Yeah. But the jnani has got no emotional crutches, and therefore there is no fear of the emotional crutches breaking, and therefore the jnani cannot have any fear at all. Fearlessness. In fact, there is another way to look at fear also. That is not a consequence of raga as much, but it is a consequence of dvaitam. Whenever there is dvaitam, the Upanishad asserts, whenever there is dvaitam, there is fear. Whenever there is a sense of other, there is fear. Dvitiya deva bhayam bhavati. So whenever there is a sense of the other, then there can be some kind of danger arising from that other. And therefore there is fear. But when the jnani sees that I alone am, there is no second thing in my order of reality at all. I alone am as Brahman. There is no second thing at all. Then there is fearlessness. Dvitiya deva bhayam bhavati. In the case of the jnani, there is no dvitiya. There is no other. Therefore, there is no sense of fear at all. Vita raga bhayaha and krodhaha. Again, in case of an ajnani, he has a binding ragaha. So again, all of this originates from the ragaha. He has a binding desire. If it is not fulfilled, then the ajnani sees himself as deficient, wanting, inadequate, and he cannot stand himself being deficient, wanting, inadequate. So his desire is a binding desire. Bandhaka kamaha. And until it is fulfilled, he cannot be at rest. And if it is not fulfilled because of some obstruction, then he is angry at that obstruction. He becomes angry at the cause of that obstruction. If I am trying to procure something, then the resources in the world are limited. There are other people who are after it. If somebody else gets it, I don't get it. Then he is angry towards that other person. And therefore, krodhaha is also a consequence of binding ragaha, binding kama. Whereas again, in case of the jnani who sees himself as full and complete, no binding ragaha is possible, no binding kamaha is possible. And therefore, there is no anger possible in the sense that because if it is fulfilled, it is fine. If it is not fulfilled, also I am full and complete. So there is no cause for anger in the jnani at all. Therefore, vita raga dhaya krodhaha. Therefore, Bhagavan gave 5 lakshanas here. Dukkheshu anudvikna manaha. In unfavorable situations, his mind is not disturbed. Sukheshu vigata sprihaha. When there are favorable situations, he doesn't develop a longing, a craving, or any addiction to that situation. And vita ragaha. So he is free from these binding ragas. And fear, he is free from fear. And he is free from anger. Vita raga bhaya krodhaha. He is free from bhayaha, fear, and krodhaha, anger. Sthitadhihi munihi uchyate. So such a person is called a sage, Bhagavan says. Such a person is a wise person, a munihi, a sage. So a sage doesn't mean a person who's with kavi, with kashaya vastram and with a long beard sitting in a forest. That is what we imagine when we think of a sage. But then Bhagavan says anybody who has these characteristics, such a person is a sage, even in the midst of the world. In any dress, he may be in any dress. and in any external situation. He doesn't have to be in a forest with a long beard and kashaya vastra. He can be in a normal dress. He may look like a normal person, but if this internal transformation is there, in terms of the characteristics that Bhagavan is talking about, then such a person is a sage. And how did he become a sage? Sthitadhihi. Sthitadhihi means through the assimilation, through the internalization of this knowledge. All else is a byproduct of the internalization of this knowledge. So this section should really motivate us to take up the study of the Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavan is talking about all of these benefits. And how does it come about? Through Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasana. Then in the next section, Bhagavan is continuing on the same theme of the characteristics of the Sthitaprajña. We will read verse number 57. Yas sarvatranabhisnehaha
यः सर्वत्रानभिस्नेहः
tat prapya shubhashubham
तत्तप्राप्य शुभाशुभम्
नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि
नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि
तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता.
तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता.
So Bhagavan says, Yaha na abhinandati na dveshti. Meaning, he neither rejoices, na abhinandati na dveshti, nor does he hate. And being what? Anabhisnehaha san. So we can supply a san, meaning being anabhisnehaha. So what does anabhisnehaha mean? It means being unattached. He never gets hooked to any person, object, or situation, never gets attached. So snehaha means anything that is viscous or sticky. That is called snehaha. So if you touch it, it sticks to you. So imagine we see abhishekam being done in temples with milk and honey, etc. So imagine a person whose abhishekam has been done with gum. So if this person whose abhishekam has been done with gum, if he walks about, then all kinds of things stick to that person. So an ajnani's mind is like that. It is like a mind for which abhishekam has been done with gum. And when this ajnani goes somewhere, he gets attached to people, gets attached to objects, gets attached to situations. But a jnani's mind, imagine there is a slanting surface, which is very, very smooth. So anything you place on it, it will just slide away. Nothing sticks. So jnani may also move around in the world and interact with people, objects, and situations, but doesn't get emotionally attached to anything. And that's why we say sarvatra. Sarvatra anabhisnehaha means he is with regards to anything in this creation. Sarvatra, with regards to anything in this creation, the jnani doesn't develop this abhisnehaha, doesn't develop attachment. So how do we know that there is no attachment? We can infer that there is attachment if there is worry, if there is preoccupation of the mind, or if there are special prayers with regards to anything. Then there is worry, preoccupation, special prayers. All of these are indications of being attached to something. And therefore, the jnani has got no such attachment. And having done what? So Bhagavan says, Yaha Munihi. So we can supply a Munihi there. Yaha Munihi Sarvatra Anabhisneha san na abhinandati na tveshti. So a jnani, a sage, a Munihi, who is never attached to anything, and neither rejoices nor does he hate. Having done what? Having obtained prapya. Prapya is there in the second quarter. Prapya. And having obtained what? Shubha Shubham. So whatever is pleasant, auspicious, favorable, or unpleasant, inauspicious, unfavorable. So in all of these situations, having obtained Shubha Shubham, Shubham and Ashubham, he doesn't rejoice and nor does he hate. So such a person, his knowledge is well established. Tasya prajna pratishtita bhavati. So he is a Sthitaprajña. He is the one who is internalized, assimilated this knowledge. So in an unfavorable situation, the jnani does not have any resistance. If there is resistance to the unfavorable situation, that is what we call sorrow. Unacceptance of the situation. But a jnani is able to accept the unfavorable situation in his fullness, in his completeness, in the light of the knowledge that I am Brahman. So for a karma yogi, the samatvam is a result of his attitude. As a result of the attitude of prasada buddhi, as a result of his attitude that everything is coming from Ishvaraha, he regulates his responses and therefore there is samatvam with effort. But in case of a jnani, this samatvam is born out of his internalization and assimilation of knowledge. So essentially, Bhagavan gives three more lakshanas in this shloka. One is abhisneha nivrittihi, or otherwise, in simpler terms, we can say raga nivrittihi, or there's raga nivrittihi with regards to everything in the creation. There are no binding ragas, no binding attachment. Yaha sarvatranabhisneha. And then abhinandana nivrittihi, or removal. There is no harsha, there is no elation with regards to favorable situations. He doesn't develop any longing, any craving, any addiction, and there is no, as we saw in the last shloka. And here Bhagavan says there is no over celebration, there is no rejoicing. And dvesha nivrittihi, meaning there is no hate in case of an unfavorable situation. So from the next shloka onwards, there is a change of topic. So far, Bhagavan talked about the Sthitaprajña lakshanas. And from the next shloka onwards, Bhagavan talks about how does one become such a Sthitaprajña? How does a prajña become a Sthitaprajña? How does one's prajña or knowledge become Sthitaprajña, means firm knowledge? How does a prajña, one who has this knowledge, who has discovered this knowledge through shravanam and mananam, how does he become a Sthitaprajña? Means a person who has this unshakable knowledge. So Krishna talks about three methods. The primary method, of course, is nididhyasanam, which is constantly dwelling upon this knowledge to internalize it. But this nididhyasanam requires two supporting methods. One is shamaha. Shamaha is mano nigraha, or restraint or discipline of the mind. And the other is damaha, which is indriya nigraha, which is discipline or restraint of one's own sense organs. So Bhagavan will get into a discussion of indriya nigraha. Indriya nigraha means restraint of one's own senses, disciplining one's own senses. And mano nigraha in the following shlokas, which we will take up in the next class. Om Pūrṇamadah Pūrṇamidam Pūrṇāt Pūrṇamudachyate Pūrṇasya Pūrṇamadāya Pūrṇamevāvashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.